everyone, and welcome to the Propcast. My name is Louisa Dickens, co-founder of Ella Mulry and board director of the UKPA, and I shall be your weekly host. Each week for 30 minutes, we'll be connecting the VCs, prop tech startups, and real estate professionals globally, and assist in bridging that famous communication gap we all love talking about. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Propcast. Today, we will be discussing data and property law, and we are joined by Andrew Lloyd, Managing Director of prop tech company Search Acumen. So welcome to the show today, Andrew.
Morning, Louisa. Thanks for having me.
For those listening in today, Andrew has 20 years industry experience and is on a mission to shape the next generation of property law. Search Acumen is using the latest technology such as AI combined with data to create market-leading opportunities for commercial real estate lawyers and conveyancers. Search Acumen's team are property and technology data experts, delivering solutions with emerging technology for conveyancers and commercial real estate lawyers. Now, we can think of them as property data engineers, continually pushing the boundaries of what's possible and never satisfied with the status quo. They anticipate changes in data regulation and market dynamics to ensure your business has the right information at the right time. Their desire to innovate, re-engineer and harness technology for the benefit of their clients is in their DNA. And this sounds super technical, Andrew. So I'm looking forward to hearing a lot more about your product. But before we do that, tell us a bit more about your journey to becoming Managing Director of Search Acumen. You know, you started off in South England, Portsmouth University. I know it well. I'm from the Isle of Wight, to joining Decision Insight Information Group, which I think was sold to a large US private equity group. And then you've gone to a startup. You know, it's an unusual journey. Tell us a bit about it.
Sure. Well, I went to uni in the late 80s, early 90s, which seems like a very long time ago now. And I did engineering. I actually did geotechnical engineering at Portsmouth. And the first 10 years of my career was as a geotechnical and environmental engineer in the consultancy sector. And I realized quite early on in that profession that, first of all, the UK doesn't value engineers, generally speaking. And so the career opportunities are limited. Secondly, everybody working in engineering is an engineer. So you don't have a very good mix of sort of talent and personality types. And thirdly, we were in that sort of period in the 90s where the first wave of technology adoption was starting to change the world. So we went from, sort of word processors to full on, IT, email. You could no longer post your report to your client. You were, you weren't faxing it, you were emailing them. All the excuses for a late report were disappearing very quickly. And I decided and realized that I liked the technology more than I liked the engineering. So I basically went to sort of evening classes to learn more about becoming a Microsoft engineer. And once I picked up a couple of qualifications, around about 2000, I jumped ship from engineering and decided to work in IT, essentially, be one of the IT crowd. And that's when I met, during my sort of job interviews, I met a guy called Mark Riddick. And he, at the time, was launching a business called Searchflow, which was born out of a personal search company that he created in the 80s, and a scheme back in the sort of early 2000s called the National Land Information Service, which was sort of a government-backed drive to get property data and information more available in the marketplace through the use of technology and the drive of connecting local authorities together. It was a huge dream, never came off, as you can imagine, with working with, at the time, it was nearly 420 local authorities. But the ambition was there. And so I joined Mark in that business, essentially, and started to work with him. And then also my current business partner, Andy Somerville, and a lot of the guys that are still with me now, in building Searchflow. And in the first instance, we grew that to the largest provider of property searches. Now, a brief explanation of what that means. It isn't, going to Rightmove and looking for property. This is in the legal profession. This is the inquiries that you make of primarily local authorities and land registry, but increasingly looking at other data sources such as environmental and mining and infrastructure utilities in order to validate the title of the property and ensure that there's no risk in the purchase or sale or transaction that's being involved. So rather than call them searches, it's better to refer to them probably as inquiries. A lot of the data comes from local authorities and local government. And as you can imagine, that was a paper-driven process. You used to fill out a check and write a letter to the local authority saying, please could you answer some questions about this property address? And they would send you back a standard report form, the answers on which you would, which the lawyer would then review in the context of a conveyancing transaction or a commercial transaction. We had a vision at the time that said, look, right now that paper-driven stuff is madness. You could do all of this online. You'd be able to at least place your order, for this information through an online portal. So we essentially created the first online shop for property inquiries and property information, which was selling these search requests to local authorities, land registry, and other providers. The big environmental data companies like Landmark and Groundshaw, the coal authorities, the big utilities companies, water companies. And so it provided that the mantra at the time was kind of one-stop shop. As a lawyer, why spend time writing checks and sending letters when you could pop onto our website, give us the address, and we'll do the rest. And that proved to be hugely successful. And we grew Searchflow to a point that we sold that business to a Canadian company called MDA around in 2006. And they merged Searchflow with their own property inquiry business and gave us control of both companies to run. And we continue to grow that business right through to the point where we think, based on sort of land registry volume figures and so on, we got to about 30% market share. So almost one in three transactions in the UK was going through Searchflow for its property inquiries. And at its peak in 2007, we did 400,000 inquiries in 12 months.
Wow.
It was massive. We had almost 200 people at that point. And then, of course, the financial crisis hit, which is my least favorite period of my employment. Even for a technology business at the time, we had a lot of people. We had 200 staff. We had people going out collecting search data directly from local authorities, out in cars and visiting these boroughs and reviewing records. And so we had a big operation. And overnight, the volume of the business that we were doing was cut in half. We went from 1.2 million to 560,000 house sales a year. And so that was a tough period. You learn a lot about yourself when you go through something like that. And then although again, because we were hugely successful, the company wasn't in trouble, as it were. It was just uncomfortable because a lot of staff, lost their jobs over that period. We just didn't have the volume. We came out of that in reasonably good shape, again, keeping the pressure on the technology, developing new ways of sharing and connecting the data that we were getting from these reports. And then in 2010, at the end of 2010, MDA sold us as a business to the Texas Pacific Group, TPG, which is one of the largest private equity companies on the planet. And we went from being a sort of a startup a decade ago with complete control to being a member of a publicly traded corporate in MDA to then being solely owned by, a revenue-driven private equity firm that wanted to flip the business in 5 years for double the value. And I'll be honest, that doesn't suit me. That's not my, that's not where I excel. The sort of the concept. At a point there, we had our back office technology was getting on for a decade old, needed to be replaced. And I felt like I was, sort of pushing at a locked door to try and get money invested in the business for the next generation, because they, the attitude was stack it high and flip the business.
Yeah.
Which is, a perfectly valid business plan, but not one that kind of, I couldn't see the point of me. What value do I add to a business like that when I'm more driven by innovation, change, constantly wanting to do things differently and better? And so I was kind of, I was a very expensive luxury for that particular type of business, essentially. So we agreed an exit, and I managed to time that for the end of July 2012, which you may or may not recall was just before the start of the London Olympics. So I was then able to at least spend the first month of my sort of period of exclusion watching every British athlete in every event I could possibly find for the Olympics, including going up to the to Olympic Park a couple of times. So that was brilliant. I said
you timed it very well.
I knew I had this year off, and so I thought, right, it really couldn't have started any better. Played a lot of golf, and we were thinking about what to do next. I mean, I was actually thinking about changing industries, and I remained good friends with Mark and with Andy over that period. Mark had left the business previously. He's sort of 10 years older than we are, so he'd retired and gone off into the sunset a few years before that. And I was playing golf with Mark on a January, and he sort of looked at me and said, "Well, what would you do differently if you did it all again?" This was on the first tee at the Rochester Golf Club, and I said, "Mark, why would I do it all again?" He said, I know, but if you were to do it again, what would you do differently?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. Give me a minute to think about it." So we played the first hole, and as I'm walking onto the green, it takes about 10 minutes or so, and I got there. I went, right. I said, look, the opportunity now, 10 years on from when we first started, is really largely based around the way that you can implement technology. We were just at the beginning. This is sort of 2013 time, right? So we're just at the beginning of cloud adoption. Microsoft is launching its Office 365 and Azure services, where Amazon Web Services are getting up and running in a meaningful kind of way. The advent of the sort of agile development processes meant that you could create applications much more rapidly and much more cheaply than you could back in 2000. I think the original version of the Searchflow back office that we created cost about £1 million to do. It was a big investment at the time, and I was confident we could do it for a tenth of that cost, 10 years later, but to build the same kind of infrastructure, and you put it in the cloud, and as I said, you'd have an office that was really just a wireless router and people connecting, browser-based services. And he said, "Oh, great." He said, "So that sounds promising. What about searches?" And I said, "Well, look, things are starting to change. We're just starting to see the beginning of the open data standards. Government is realizing the value of the data it's holding, and is also understanding that making that available on a wider basis digitally is becoming increasingly important. So I can see the next decade, sort of 2010 to 2020, 2013 to sort of 2025, as being a period where data becomes more and more important. Data about property in our particular space becomes more and more important and more available. So we should be creating systems that not only can we set up a business that will do what we used to do, sell property inquiries and make a bit of money, but create something that as this data becomes available, we can add to the portfolio of services the real-time data analytics that you really need for buying and selling and transacting on property in a legal market space, rather than waiting for these search reports to come back from third-party providers.
And tell us a little bit more about your vision to the market. I'm sure we've obviously touched on the data side, the tech side, but I'm sure there's a lot more to your vision.
Yeah, I mean, so exactly. So in that sort of period that we're talking about now, the last 7 years for us, essentially, a lot of the things that we talked about in 2013, 2014 are now starting to become a bit more mainstream. The open data standards, the sort of the government GIS and data groups are releasing more information, as we thought they would. And what this has opened up is the opportunity to build services that are real time for property, which is a massive paradigm shift for the legal marketplace. And the marketplace works as it does today because of caveat emptor, that everything is on the buyer to confirm that what they're buying is what they think they're buying. It's their job to do the due diligence, and they're taking the risk. And that's the reason lawyers are so heavily involved in the process, is because that somebody has to make that risk-based decision about whether you're buying a home, which you only do once every 10 years. And so as a member of the public, you've got no idea what's going on. You definitely need advice in that process. Complex. And if you're a commercial business, then the amount of finance involved is significant. So again, is big when you're talking about transactions. And so but time has always been a factor, and it's a very hot topic at the minute, is obviously how long these transactions take, both commercial and residential. And part of that time is down to the availability of information about the properties. So our vision, what I see in 5 years time from now, maybe 10 years tops, is that you as an individual will be stood outside any property in the UK with an app on your phone that is basically going to tell you, in legal advice terms, everything you would need to know about buying that property from the same data sources that you would have gone to today and asked for a PDF report, can be done, instantly by the use of the data in the first place and the AI and analytics that can pull that information together and put it on an app on your phone, right? And that, you get a pre-sale sign-off almost. And with that sign-off can come pre-approval for mortgages. The data, it spreads much wider. Our little bit is obviously focused on proving good title and the quality of the property itself, but you can link all of that into, your ID services, your financial services and pre-approvals for individuals' mortgages, but also mortgages on properties. Survey, you can digital surveying, all of that stuff will start to be linked together into this completely digital transaction. And sort of it's a massive opportunity for businesses that want to concentrate on the technology to deliver those services rather than keep the status quo of where we are today.
And there's obviously massive opportunity, but with opportunities never without its challenges. What would you say some of the industry's biggest challenges are? Because you'll be surrounded by challenges within the law sector as well as real estate.
Yeah.
So how are you overcoming them, and what maybe are the top 3 challenges you're looking to overcome? Okay,
so this isn't the first time we've talked about changing the industry. So, I've been involved with a number of initiatives over the years, whether it was the Home Information Packs, whether it was Land Registry's Chain Matrix, whether it was the e-Home Buying Forum. There's been lots of different attempts to evolve or even revolutionize the home buying and selling process. My view would be that they all failed for one very simple reason. The old process, the current process, wasn't broken enough, right? You could sell 1.2 million homes a year doing what we did today, and it supported an industry. And the industry itself didn't feel the need to change because there was no pressure. There was nothing to say what you're doing today doesn't work, right? And without that drive, then although it would have been possible to have modernized a lot of what was going on, it wasn't needed. So the opportunity this time round is that the pressure to change is coming from outside of the home moving, the legal sector. Everything around the legal sector is changing. Now that you've got the Internet of Things, you've got the advent of AI, you've got the future that involves blockchain, you're going to have all of those things driving. And of course, the more savvy, the tech savvy consumer, your 20-year-old today isn't going to want to engage with a conveyancer in the same way that someone of my age or older does or would naturally do. Their expectations are moving very rapidly as to how they, what kind of services they will gravitate to. And in fact, the sad news of for anybody who doesn't believe this, the sad news about of Topshop, yesterday is just a very stark reminder that if you sit there long enough saying it won't change because everything's okay, eventually you get bypassed. And so the challenges we have in the sector are that there's massive inertia amongst existing players. because they've done it this way for, oh my God, for 30, 40 years. And many of the decision makers in those businesses, I've literally done it the same way for 30 or 40 years. And so it's the adoption of new processes is slow. The legal profession is adverse to risk. It's their job. From almost the first day they go to law school, they're trained to help their clients avoid risk. If they can eliminate risk altogether, that's the sort of the perfect result. And change is risk, of course, always is. And so, overcoming those sort of challenges has been the key one. And then the slow crawl that we've made towards access to data, public data.
This sort of leads on as well into the next question, whether or not you can name sort of some of your clients, what pressures are your clients currently facing and how are you alleviating that pressure?
So I think a good example of how the profession has to change because of outside pressure rather than internal is that the clients of these businesses, two good examples would be in commercial real estate, the bigger housing associations who employ the city firms to help them manage their portfolios of properties. And some of these associations own tens of thousands of properties now. They've spent the last 5 years merging these smaller associations into these sort of the bigger mega ones. And they've got large portfolios of property that need to be cleansed and cleaned and refinanced and reviewed. And they are putting a lot of time and money pressure, costs onto these commercial law firms who are having to think about doing things in a completely different way in order to meet those demands. And the other sector that tends to drive it in residential tends to be new house building, the new home builders. They're on tight cash flow deadlines. They're looking to get houses completed and sold in very short time frames, 28 days typically. Talk to most conveyancers who work with new home builders, and they're talking about offer to completion in 28 days. That's their target. And if you as a law firm can't do that, then you probably aren't going to make it onto their panel. And so the clients are starting to drive some of the behaviour in these law firms, and the firms that are proving to be successful are the ones that have recognised that the adoption of technology and the use of data is one of the ways they can cut down on their resource and time. If you have to review 64,000 titles of a property, then under sort of old processes, that would have been a team of junior lawyers sat in a room for 2 weeks, flicking through title plans and registers. Whereas now, of course, you can extract the data, you can analyse the data, you can review it, you can look for risks, you can highlight elements that don't match. All of those things are now possible through, even through standard algorithms, even before you start putting the power of AI onto it. And so you're able to demonstrate to these firms that the ability to do the simple, mundane tasks more quickly and allow them to concentrate on the specialist legal work where they really add value. Where's the value in a lawyer reading 60,000 titles, right? You want them doing something a bit more meaningful than that.
No, exactly, especially for what you're paying them.
Position yourself to thrive with a 5-week course that covers the essentials of designing, developing, marketing and operating offices in 2021 and beyond. Check out the Future-Proof Office course at realinnovationacademy.com. Quote LMRE for a 10% discount.
Are your customers receptive of this? Are they expecting more? Obviously, they're expecting all the processes to be sort of sped up. How has sort of COVID impacted how they're responding to this technology?
So there's two questions in there. in the first instance, like all markets, you have the standard range of early adopters, the people who are open to change but want somebody to jump for, and then you've got your the guys that it wouldn't matter if it was if the tide was up around their knees, they still wouldn't want to change what they do. So that's the same as any market. So we've always targeted as our sort of client base in the first instance those early adopters, and then those firms that are willing to sort of follow the early adopters once there's a proof of concept. And what the advantage those firms have found is that they're attracting the more tech savvy client base, which of course now, with the way that the markets are changing, tends to be the bigger, more powerful companies, because tech businesses are the ones that are, now leading they're leading the world economy, aren't they? Essentially, is it 8 of the top 10 size businesses on the planet are now tech-based companies, whereas a decade ago it would have been 2 or 3, and the rest were many of them were petrochemical and retail. So you can see that shift happening right through the base of businesses and companies. And so in order to serve these companies, you need to change your attitude as a lawyer. And the early adopter opportunity is that you get some of those bigger clients first. And secondly, COVID. Well, wow. This is not a profession that was prepared for COVID out of the box, shall we say. The concept of working from home, out of sight of people in the office, didn't really exist in any meaningful way in any parts of this kind of profession. We're not just with the lawyers, but with other elements as well. And I think this has opened a lot of people's eyes to the possibility that you don't have to be in the office till 10 p.m. every night to prove that you're doing the work. And you can do it digitally far more efficiently than you can if you're working with paper and boxes and files. When you're working from home, you don't have access to that archive of boxes in your office that have got on boxes and so on. You have to find a different way of doing it. And I think it shocked the industry. I mean, I know Land Registry certainly had a challenge when lockdown first occurred. Again, as an organisation that's very much structured on having people together and their caseworkers in the office working on desktops, to suddenly have all these guys at home, there was a proportion of their workforce that didn't even have internet at home, and they had to solve all of that to get back up and running again, which was a massive task. But now that you've done that, now that you've made that investment, whether you're a law firm or your Land Registry or your the utilities businesses, you've had to think about, how could I do things differently? And I know we chatted before we got on air about that, the trust. I think originally business owners were worried about working from home because you can't see what they're doing. And I think and this is true of us as well, and we've always felt ourselves, reasonably forward thinking and very positive about this stuff, is that actually people work really hard when they're at home. When they realize there's a job to do and there's work in front of them, they're perfectly capable of getting tasks completed and getting work done if you give them the right culture, the right tools, and the right environment. Pretty much like they do in the office. And in fact, one of the things they miss most is some of the human contact, which if you can find a way to replace that, and the legal profession is facing the same challenges. Some of them back in the offices, but many of them are now working from home and realizing that you don't have to travel into the city every day. You can actually be more productive because you're not being interrupted working from home.
Agreed.
And I think that's a change that is going to stay. Right? People have now fully understood that that's possible. And a lot of these law firms have adopted technology that they'd resisted up until this point because they didn't believe in it. The belief wasn't quite there yet. And so the thought of doing digital signatures on contracts and e-signing, title documents for property transfers is now not only possible, but becoming the preferred solution.
I think it's also a lot of it is just getting used to it. I'm currently selling my property at the moment, and I feel like when I did an online signature, I was signing my life away without really knowing. It was just so easy to do, and it's such a big personal asset to you. But so we've obviously seen a lot of change. Now, let's think 15 years ahead, roughly. What do you think the market's going to look like?
Not like this.
Hopefully not.
I mean, the one advantage of the property sector is that we always need somewhere to live. Right? We always need that the existence of property, right? So that as a business is going to continue. However, the way that we transact and own property, I think, is open to huge change. Not only are we collecting, huge amounts of data through IoT and other applications about land and property. And that's growing, more and more by the day, whether you're an investor or a commercial real estate owner or a private owner, the amount of information and data possible. I mean, I get emails now telling me, from my hive, how my heat and power usage compares to, other houses in my area or other, all of that is feeding into this understanding. So there's much, much more data. And of course, I think the government organisations like Land Registry and the local authorities will recognise that holding data themselves is an important public duty, but doesn't have to be restrictive. You can make it available digitally without compromising the value or the integrity of that data, particularly if you secure it through things like blockchain. And so even the public records, and this isn't just true of property, that's going to be true of all sectors. Whether it's your passport, whether it's your medical record, whether it's your driving license, all of that is going to change dramatically. Your ID is going to become digital. And I know that for a lot of people, that's a scary thought, but it's going to happen. I look at my kids who are sort of, two of them are 16, 18, their concept of the world is completely different from where mine would have been. And that's the next generation. They're the people that will adopt this, not us. We'll be the old fuddies in the home wishing that I remember when this was all fields. and you've got to think that's 15 years time, my kids will be in their 30s and they'll be the ones driving and adopting this, and they're going to come from a different place. They're the advent of social networking, so it's inevitable. I also think the way that we own property could change dramatically. I'm certainly interested in tracking the value of crypto tokenization and funding for property. I think that could be quite an exciting way. We're obviously in the UK going to face continuing challenges around the value of property and how first-time buyers and the price can't keep going up, can it? How can we keep growing property values like we do now?
Well, I hope it doesn't.
but the reason it keeps going up is because we keep finding increasingly innovative ways to fund people buying property. Yeah, and I think sort of tokenization of property through crypto tokens might be one of those innovations that allows you to invest and almost crowdfund, some of these transactions. Certainly that will have the big financial institutions worried that if you no longer need banks and lenders in order to fund property, then I think that could be, that could be a game changer. And the everyday automation that is going to be possible through implementation of AI. I mean, the change that I saw through the 90s into the early 2000s with basically going from offline to online, the reduction in distance being relative through the use of the internet, I think is going to be equally challenged by the ability to, in terms of the amount of change it will bring, the ability to automate in a human way using AI. And that's a facilitator. I think blockchain is the bigger game changer in terms of it removes sections of the market that exist today that provide trust, which you can replace with technology, right? That's the paradigm shift, but it is going to be facilitated by AI being the next evolution of the way that technology and computing power will work for us. I mean, we've already implemented AI in the business because we recognize it as the next way to be more efficient. And as I said earlier, it's one of my drivers. We started small, we started simple. We taught an AI to read addresses because we needed to learn how to use AI. And that was something that our clients struggled with. They had, if you get a portfolio from a client of 60,000 properties and the address data is not cool, then you have to do something to clean that. And that's a hard job. Even with algorithms, you can't match everything. But with AI, you can. And so we did that. And then we started teaching AI to read emails and search results and sort things out that we were having to do manually. And now we're teaching it to read the content of property inquiries and learn about, risk in property? Can it read the result and tell you whether a property's good title or not? And so these things that traditionally would have been only tasks for people, but mundane, can be automated now where they couldn't have been before.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for getting rid of any sort of mundane task, but this is where everyone gets so scared that robots are going to take over the world. Andrew, I'm conscious of time. We're coming to the end of the podcast. I thought a nice way of branding off the show. You mentioned earlier, you've obviously grown two successful businesses during some pretty tough times with the financial crisis and now the pandemic. What advice to our listeners would you give us who are, trying to grow a business in this space?
Believe in your people. I think that's the one thing I've learned over the years is that money can come and go, right? You can lose money, you can make money. There's always going to be opportunities, but the people that you have around you, the belief in them and them being part of your business and what you will get in return from people and staff that believe in you in terms of leadership far outweighs the short-term losses or gains that you get financially. And it's taken, most people go through the cycle of, am I making money? And I think, there's all the usual business advice of, cash flow and good financial management and have you got a good marketing plan and all that, which is all absolutely valid. But at the end of the day, all of those things must be implemented by people who believe in your cause. And if you can't inspire that in the people that work for you, then you're done. You just won't be successful, and you certainly won't survive tough times without the team around you, knuckling down and wanting to be part of it. And I think that for me is the biggest, the biggest piece of advice I could give is just believe in the people, look after them, and I swear they will look after you. Yeah,
and then it goes back to how we started the conversation, trust. It's a two-way street. You got to trust them, they got to trust you. And hopefully, the UK are bringing in the vaccines. We're the first ones to do it. Good old Brit, pretty proud of our nation there. But as we are at the end of the show, please let our wonderful audience and listeners and the best way for them to connect with you and hear more about Search Acumen.
Sure, you can find me on LinkedIn. Andrew Lloyd on LinkedIn is probably the best bet, or you can drop by the website, search-acumen.co.uk, and you can find my contact details on there. More than happy to have conversations with people about this sort of stuff. It's a real, passion of ours anyway. So yeah, feel free to get in touch.
Awesome, bro. Look, thank you so much for joining us on the Propcast, Andrew, and I'll catch up with you after the show.
Brilliant, will do.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Propcast, and a big thanks to our special guests. Make sure you visit our website, www.lmre.co.uk, where you can subscribe to our show, or you'll find us on iTunes and Spotify, where all good content is found. Whilst you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate if you could rate and review us on iTunes, or if you simply just spread the word. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday, and I'll catch you later.
Hi, this is Nelson from Property Quants. I'd like to invite you to join our Introduction to Data Science and Machine Learning for Real Estate seminar. To learn more, visit propertyquants.com/seminar and use special code LMRE20 on Eventbrite for a discount.
You're listening to a Podcast Company podcast. This was made by Podcast Syndicator, where we help you go from start to grow to making money with your podcast. Let us help you share your message and your voice with the world. Reach out now, Jason at podcastsyndicator.com or Brett at podcastsyndicator.com to find out more. Thank you for listening, and do come back to hear nothing but the best podcasts.